the British referendum on England's membership in the European Union was interesting to me, and in some ways very hopeful, because for several reasons that were very real experiences for me, I tend to be a kind of what is people sometimes call in a disparaging way, a conspiracy theorist. So, pardon me if I'm a little suspicious when any administration tells me, their plan. But the EU referendum was so completely incompetently handled by the British government, by the people in the British government who were committed to staying in the EU, by the EU itself, so badly handled that I'm optimistic that, in fact, the world may be slightly more an effect of the general cluelessness and incompetence of our leadership rather than its organized and purely malevolent intention.
Is it worse now than it has ever been?
Yes. It's worse now than it's ever been because the complexity is, greater than it's ever been before. The intermingling of all the national economies, which in fact is a scramble for resources, to continue to keep resources cheap as humanly possible. Labor is as cheap as possible because of all the free trade agreements. That's interlinking all of the economies of the world into a kind of one world economy. It's very complicated. And then the levels of consumption and levels of electricity production and automobile use in the world has totally changed the climate. And the chemical makeup of the oceans. Population levels are straining every resource, every food resource. The oceans, fish populations are collapsing. And remember, fish was the cheapest and easiest way for human beings to survive when we were first coming out of Africa. There was really abundant food sources for people in those days, and now they're not. So the complexity is extreme. And, it's heartening to see this level of incompetence in Europe because it makes me feel a little hopeful that, we're not just going to be badly screwed, but rather we're going to stumble and fumble and crawl along until we all end up in extinction.
Your theory that a lot of things always come down to where it really comes down to white men killing people and stealing their shit.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're talking about now that I just am putting together is, for a long time, it almost was that simple. They literally went out and killed people and stole their shit. Whereas now there are so many layers of complexity and veiling in the way they're doing that.
Right.
So we don't even see that that's what's happening.
Then there is the lead in the water, the fluoride in the water, the petrocarbon, byproducts in the air, and the glycophosphates and the other neonicotinoids in the food chain, which are literally making people dumb as fucking rocks. And the Brexit is a perfect example of that because the British, out of pure antagonism to the rest of the world and a kind of delusional nationalism that hasn't existed for 200 years in England, really, voted themselves out of an astonishingly lucrative deal, simply because the person promoting the idea, Nigel Farage, happens to be a rather charming and effective stand-up comedian, as well as a person who, is engaged in political activity.
Is it oversimplified to look at the irony and hypocrisy of the fact that this is Britain doing this? Britain, who spent millennia conquering every other place in the world.
Oh yeah.
What do you see as the best case scenario of how this plays out in the next decade or two?
I think in the next decade or two, what you're going to see is there are going to be three competing forces. The infinite greed and arrogance of the 1% is one force. The second force is going to be the anger and the strain being experienced by the poor that they are going to be expressing increasingly. It's really what this Brexit vote is about. It's about the fact that you have very big economic differences within the country. The wealthy, white, and educated voted against exiting the European Union, and the poorer, less urban, more agrarian, less educated people in England voted for it.
So you don't think that there was the white elite motivation? It was more
I think the white elite just were so arrogant, they assumed that everybody held their view and Brexit, that the exiting the European Union didn't have a chance. Cameron is really one of the stupidest guys, and he must be feeling really pretty much like a jerk right now, because he didn't have to have this referendum. So I think that these three forces are going to come together, and in the next 10 or 20 years, I can't tell you how it's going to play out. I can say that right now I think it's going to be intense. And I also think that this is the opinion of the American government, and the reason why, police departments across the country have been allowed to be militarized. I can't say how this is going to end, but I can say that I think there's going to be a continued breakdown in the civil discourse, or by now, because of Trump especially, the uncivil discourse that is happening in our country and around the world. And I think we're also going to see, thanks to upcoming President Clinton, the absolute uselessness of military responses to regional conflicts that will emerge because of this.
Yeah.
So I don't think the conflict in the United States will be so bad, because I think, the police are ready to shoot anybody at any moment without any due process whatsoever, and throw them in a private prison for, as long as they possibly can get away with it.
Well, that works until the numbers get
They're just
bigger.
going to throw up more private prisons, and until the rest of the population stands up and says, we won't pay for this anymore. It seems to me that the political elites are so out of touch and such a bunch of numbnuts that they're going to screw it up badly and push the world into a circumstance where You know, everybody's ego gets engaged and there's a lot of conflict and distress. Which means that those of us who want to have half a brain in our head, and those of us who want to have some sense of enjoyment of the life that we have been blessed with, should consider carefully eating right, exercising regularly, and cultivating themselves and their own inner peace and happiness through a meditative practice.
In a community.
In a community is a good thing.
And that's why we are doing these from the heart. Thanks for joining us.